cool visions to leaders all over the world. Visions that would launch exciting businesses that would employ hundreds of people. Visions that would end human trafficking, that would increase food production so no one would have to go to bed hungry. Visions that would provide clean drinking water for everyone in the world. Visions that would root corruption out of government. Visions that would end racial and ethnic violence. I believe to my toes that God has sent millions of cool, life-enhancing visions to leaders young and old, all over the world, only to have those visions snuffed out because a leader thought the cost might be too high or the potential for failure might be too great. But you see, no one knows that all these cool visions are being aborted. These deaths occur behind a veil of secrecy and silence. So in my view, when we look at a violent and suffering world, and we all watch the news every night, I think we have a decision to make on where to lay the blame. Should we lay the blame at the feet of a compassionate God who has been sending life-enhancing visions to millions of leaders all over the world? Or should we lay the blame at the feet of a large number of gutless, cowardly leaders who aborted the misery-alleviating visions that God would have blessed wildly had there been the leadership courage to give them birth? Let me push this even further. I would bet a lot of someone else's money that a high percentage of you listening to me right now have an extremely cool vision hidden somewhere within you. A vision so cool that if you knew it would succeed, you'd drop everything and pursue it today. Might be the vision to start a new business venture or to take the one you run in a new direction. It might be the vision to start a new kind of church or a cool new non-for-profit or a vision to reform an arm of government. Truth be told, your pulse rate increases every time you think about it. It's just that you lack one thing. Basic bravery. Old-fashioned courage. And gang, I get it. I've been paralyzed by fear far more times than I would ever care to admit. And I have beaten myself up mercilessly for being cowardly throughout my leadership career. But then, there comes that day, in my case anyway, when I realize I gotta live with myself. And I gotta stand before God someday. And so I have to sort of grab hold of myself and say the words that God said to young Joshua, and I gotta personalize them. Be strong and courageous, Bill. What are you thinking? Be strong and courageous. Do not fear. God himself is with you. He will never forsake you. And then I got to take that vision out of hiding. I've got to talk to some trusted friends about it. I've got to get some feedback, and when the time is right, I have to step out in faith despite the fact that I'm vibrating with fear. And I just have to trust that God is going to help me achieve it in His power, in His strength, and for His glory. Gang, it's why God made us leaders. It's not to sit and suck air here. It's to step out in faith and move something or someone all the way to there, despite our fear. But gang, don't go to your grave with cool visions shriveling up and dying inside of you. Don't be that leader. Don't die a coward. One day, shortly after our care center opened, I rode my motorcycle over one night and sat in front of the new care center, just watched people going in and out, was praying and just looking at the miracle God had done. And a woman in a beat-up minivan with about 5 kids in the back pulled up right next to me. She recognized me. She walked over and said quietly with a very heavy accent, "Pastor Bill, thanks for this incredible place. Right now, it's our family's only hope. It's our family's only hope." Then she left to go get some groceries for all those kids. I sat out on the motorcycle and thought about her words. Our new care center was her family's only hope in this world. And then I thought of how close I had come to killing that vision before I had breathed a word of it to anybody. And I would have killed it because I was afraid we couldn't raise the money in tough economic times. And I'll tell you, I followed half the way home. What a colossal tragedy that fear-induced abortion would have been. Leaders' visions are holy commodities. They come from our transcendent God. Treat them with the utmost respect. And for God's sake and the world's sake too, don't just kill them off in a late night fit of cowardliness. Get on your knees and say the Joshua prayer as many times as you need to say it. Be strong and courageous, do not be afraid. God will be with you and will not forsake you. Then get up off your knees, put one foot in front of the other, and walk in faith toward the launch of that vision. Deal? Deal? The second component of leadership that I want to correlate to courage has to do with the leader's absolute duty to define their current reality. We're shifting gears. The courage to define current reality. I'm pretty sure it was Max Dupree who first argued that the leader's job is to define reality. We all know that it's an essential responsibility of leadership. I've been playing around with a leadership concept the last several months that requires very sophisticated artwork, but don't you fear. I am up to the challenge. I know you're holding back the applause, now you can release it. In this new lecture that I've been inflicting on leaders in several different countries, I argue the fact that all leaders are always leading either in a situation where things are going down, the organization is not doing well, or in a status quo environment, or in an upturn, and that each of these realities requires totally different leadership approaches. This is not rocket science, but just hang with me for a moment. In this lecture that I've been working on, I begin by having all the leaders in the room simply circle the current reality of their organization, the organization they're leading. I give them a minute to think about it and to circle what reality they're in. Then I begin to explain that in a downturn, a leader has to declare an emergency. He or she has to get everyone's attention and make it blindingly clear that if there's not a dramatic course correction in the very near future, the survival of the organization may be at risk. So it's a leader's job to admit the downturn, declare an emergency, create a plan of action, and get it going fast. A while ago, I went to the hospital to get an MRI. And while I was lying in this huge electronic tube undergoing the MRI, buzzers and flashers started to go off in the rooms and the hallways of the hospital. A voice over the hospital loudspeaker came on and said, code red, 4th floor. So everyone in the MRI room takes off running. So I'm laying in this tube thinking to myself, thanks gang, I'll just stay here and radiate myself. While you're dealing with whatever a code red is, I'll probably grow a third eyeball in the middle of my forehead by the time you get it all sorted out. No worries. So a little while later, the whole MRI staff comes back into the room and finished my procedure, but before I left, I had to ask. I said, what's a code red? They explained that it meant there was a fire. And that the fire was on the 4th floor, and that protocol required everyone to drop everything and help out immediately. Oh, this made sense to me. So seasoned leaders who are leading organizations, and if these organizations have been heading south long enough, they have to come up with some way of signaling to everybody in the organization they're in a code red situation. They have to be a little dramatic about it. They have to announce that everyone has to pull together and pull together fast or something is going to burn down. This is just kind of common sense. What about an organization that gets sleepy and it's in status quo? I think you know a little bit about this. In this situation, the leader actually has to set a fire. A little arson is required. John Potter fiercely argues this point in his book called The Sense of Urgency. The leader has to build an airtight case that status quo is not acceptable. More than that, actually, the leader must convince everybody that status quo is extremely dangerous for an organization. Status quo is almost always the precursor to certain demise and possible death. Effective leaders do whatever it takes to get everybody to understand that, hold the team together and plan together how to break out of that status quo quagmire and get the organization moving again. And you all know what it's like to lead in an organization that's rocky. Sticking with the fire metaphor, leaders have to pour fuel on that raging fire and build on that momentum. They have to give pep talks and give raises. They need to take risks with younger leaders, let them play more. They have to innovate. They have to build cash reserves for when this particular run is done. There's a whole set of behaviors that leaders have to engage in when something is setting records. Again, just common sense mostly. But here's the point I'm sort of driving at. As I've been having fun with leaders drawing these arrows and talking about fires and so, guess what the result has been? Leaders in the groups I've been mentoring nod their heads in agreement with this whole lecture. They thank me when it's over, and then privately, usually 3 or 4 days later, leaders email me and they confide in me that the toughest part of the lecture was not understanding all of the behaviors that leaders need to do in these situations, but rather the toughest part of the lecture was the part where I asked them to actually admit and circle what reality they were in. Isn't that fascinating? One leader said it took him 3 days to work up the fortitude to circle the fact that his church is actually losing steam. It's losing altitude, spirit, strength, members, and momentum. He said this to me in an email: there's nothing under my leadership has ever gone south before. So I've been in total denial of all the data that's been indicating that for the last 18 months we've been in a downturn. I just kept calling it a temporary slump, not an actual downturn. He said he could barely make himself circle this downturn little arrow because it was like admitting he was a terrible leader or a terrible pastor or maybe even a terrible Christian for allowing this to happen while he was at